Hello and welcome to my specialization introduction and outdoor content guide for the Frost Mage in World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth. If you haven't watched the video primer for this series, I recommend that you do that now. There'll be a link in the description below, and that will get you up to speed on what we're doing in this video. Alright, so we're here on our Frost Mage. We've got our action bars up and empty. If we go into our talent tree, these are the talents you can select to fulfill the requirements laid out in the primer video. And with that all set up, we're going to get into our spell book and start sorting our spells. Now, I'm not going to go in depth to every single one of these spells, but I am going to give you a brief description so you can understand what the spell does and why we're putting it where we are. So first off, we've got Arcane Intellect. We're going to put this in our combat utility over here on the right hand side. I like to put this here so I can remember, hey, I need to have this up at all times. It's a buff that goes up for an hour and increases your intellect by 10%. This also works on your party and raid members. Next we have Blink. This is a combat utility ability. It teleports us forward 20 yards. Then we have Blizzard. This is part of our core rotation. Cold Snap is a defensive cooldown that resets the cooldown on a bunch of our other defensive cooldowns. Cone of Cold is a crowd control ability. It does a cone of damage in front of us and then slows the movement speed of enemies that get hit. Conjure Refreshment will create a food item. It goes into our bag, and we can use that constantly. We can just endlessly conjure food. We can also conjure food for our party or raid members as well. When you log out, that food goes away, so if you log back in, you need to conjure that food. Counterspell is our Interrupt ability. We can use this to counter an enemy's spell cast. That goes in our crowd control. Flurry is part of our core rotation. Frost Nova is a defensive cooldown we can use. It will freeze all enemies around us in place. Damage can break that freeze, so you'll want to be careful there. Frostbolt is part of our core rotation. Frozen Orb is a offensive cooldown we can use. It sends a big frozen orb forward, does a bunch of frost damage, and some other things that involve our passive abilities that we'll take a look at later. Ice Barrier, I like to put this by Arcane Intellect as well because this is a shield that lasts for a minute. It absorbs some damage and slows the movement speed of melee attackers. So we want to have this up as much as possible as well. Ice Block is one of our defensive cooldowns. It puts us into this big chunk of ice and we can't do anything, but the enemies can't do anything to us either. We have Ice Lance, that's part of our core rotation. Icy Veins, this is a offensive cooldown ability. It will grant you 30% haste and prevent anything from delaying your spell casts. Invisibility is a defensive cooldown we can use. It reduces the threat that we have, makes us invisible and untargetable for 20 seconds. Polymorph is a crowd control ability. It turns your opponent into a sheep. As a sheep, they can't do anything. Damage will break the effect, and while they are turned into a sheep, they will regenerate their health very quickly. Our portal will allow us to create a portal to a city, and then our party members, friendly members, raid members, can click that portal to teleport to the city. Remove Curse is a combat utility ability. It removes all curses from a friendly target. Probably not going to use that much in outdoor content. Slow Fall is a combat utility, or you could put it in miscellaneous. Basically, when you activate Slow Fall, it causes you to fall slowly, and this can prevent you from taking fall damage. Spell Steal will remove a beneficial target from an enemy and give it to you. You really don't use that too much in outdoor content. So we'll put it over here on the right-hand side of our combat utility. Summon Water Elemental. We'll put this in our miscellaneous because we're basically going to want to have this all the time before combat. So if for some reason you don't have your water elemental, I'm going to say water elemental because I do that all the time. Your water elemental, so just a heads up, you're going to want to have that out at all times. Teleport is like Portal, except instead of creating a portal everyone can click on, it only teleports you to the city. And then finally we have Time Warp. This is a offensive cooldown ability we can use to increased haste for us, party members, raid members for 40 seconds, and then it goes on to a long cooldown and we can't be affected by it for quite a while. So those are all the active abilities. Let's talk about the resources available to the Frost Mage. We've got one resource. It's called mana. You start with a certain amount of mana that's based on your intellect. You spend that on your spells and damaging abilities. Out in the open world, like, you don't even really have to think about mana, so it might as well not even be a resource. But if you do run out for some reason, there are going to be spells and abilities you won't be able to use, so keep that in mind. Alright, so we're going to take a look at the core rotation for the Frost Mage. And you can see we've only got 4 spells down here, so it might look like it's going to be pretty simple, but it's actually decently complex. So we're going to go ahead and set up our bars here. So we've got 4 abilities, and we're going to go over what these abilities do and then get into our passive spells to talk about how they all interact. Because if I were to tell you to start just doing a particular rotation, then it wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense. So let's first hit each of these abilities and cover what they do. So our main spammable ability is going to be Frostbolt. Frostbolt will deal a little bit of damage to a single target and reduce their movement speed by 50% for 15 seconds. So this is the ability that you just cast when you have nothing better to do. Alright, then we have 2 special abilities here. We've got Flurry. Flurry has a 2.5 second cast. It unleashes a flurry of ice, striking the target 3 times for a total of okay amount of damage. Each hit reduces the target's movement speed by 70% for 1 second. Okay, we're going to skip that bottom paragraph for now. Then we have Ice Lance. Quickly fling a shard of ice at the target, dealing a very small amount of damage. But Ice Lance damage is tripled against frozen targets, making it do a pretty good amount of damage. Okay. Then we have Blizzard. This is our AoE ability. We cast it. It's got a cooldown, but it causes ice shards to pelt the area, dealing a good amount of damage to all enemies in the AoE of the ability, and reducing their movement speed by 50%. We're also going to ignore the second paragraph there. So let's take a look at these abilities individually real quick. So we have our Frostbolts. We're just going to wind that up. We're going to cast it. Boop. There we go. If we take a look at our Blizzard, we're going to cast this, and after we do, it's going to deal damage in an area. I'm going to wait for these to go away. Our Flurry is going to send out those 3 flurries. Boom, 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 and we get the movement speed reduction on there from Chilled. And then Ice Lance will fling a shard of ice at the target. Alright, and we do actually need to change one of these talents. We'll change this bottom talent. Go ahead and change that because that is going to affect our rotation. Alright, so those are the abilities. Now, might seem pretty straightforward. This one does damage, that one does damage, but when we get into our passive abilities, that's where everything starts to really come together. So, first off, we have Brain Freeze. Frostbolt, our number 2 spam ability, has a 25% chance to empower your next Flurry, which is our number 1 here, that shoots the 3 icicles, or the 3 chunks of ice. Frostbolt has a 25% chance to empower your next Flurry to be instant cast, so that's nice. Deal 50% increased damage, okay, and apply Winter's Chill to the target. Winter's Chill will cause the target to take damage from your spells as if it were frozen, even if it isn't. Okay, so as we cast Frostbolt, we're going to have a chance to get that instant cast, increased damage Flurry, and the second paragraph of the description of Flurry tells you while Brain Freeze is active, and this is why just reading the ability as is can be kind of confusing. While Brain Freeze is active, which is the passive we just talked about, Flurry applies Winter's Chill, causing your target to take damage as if it were frozen. So, let's see if we can get that to happen. We're just going to cast Frostbolt until we get that. So this graphic here, the one above your head, is the one that tells you that you have brain freeze, and your next flurry is going to be instant cast, so we'll look at that. There we go, and it applies Winter's Chill to the target. Alright. So that's how that interacts. Now let's take a look at Fingers of Frost. Frostbolt, our spammable friendly ability, has a 15% chance to grant a charge of Fingers of Frost. Fingers of Frost will cause your next Ice Lance to deal damage as if the target were frozen. So we know our Ice Lance, our number 3 here, does that teeny bit of damage, but it's tripled against frozen targets. So this actually means that if we get our Brain Freeze and we use our Flurry, that gives Winter's Chill, which causes the target to take damage as if from your spells as if it were frozen, meaning Icicles will do its triple damage in that scenario. But if we don't get Brain Freeze, we can get these Fingers of Frost, which will cause just Ice Lance to deal damage as if the target were frozen. We can get up to 2 charges of Fingers of Frost. Now, I did skip the fact that Frozen Orb also has a 10% chance to grant a charge of Fingers of Frost, because Frozen Orb is an ability with a 1-minute cooldown, but it does have a chance to do that as well. So, let's see if we can get that to happen. Now, remember, we're casting Frostbolt. Okay, we got our Brain Freeze. So, Brain Freeze, remember, will make every spell deal damage as if the target were frozen. This here is Fingers of Frost. If we get a second charge of Fingers of Frost, I'll see if I can get it here before it's gone. No luck. If we were to get a second charge of Fingers of Frost, we would get an identical graphic mirrored on the other side of our character. So let's see if we can get that Fingers of Frost up again. So there is our Brain Freeze. Go ahead and cast that and get rid of it. Alright, we got another one. Come on, I'm trying to show off Fingers of Frost here. It's like, no, just Brain Freeze. Alright, come on. There we go. Alright, so now our Ice Lance will guaranteed deal that triple damage. Now, something to note, the next passive we get into here is our Mastery. It's called Icicles. Casting Frostbolt or Flurry, which we're spamming Frostbolt all the time, we get those instant cast flurries. That gives us an Icicle. When we cast Ice Lance, our nice triple damage frozen ability, this will cause all Icicles stored to begin launching at the target, dealing an okay amount of frost damage per Icicle. You can get up to 5 Icicles, and once you have 5, if you generate another one, it automatically gets launched at your target. This also increases the damage of Frozen Orb by 35%. So let's take a look at this. So as we cast our Frostbolt, we'll get 1 Icicle. We cast Flurry, we get a second one. Alright, we're going to build up to 5 here. There's 4. 5. Now if you watch, when we use Frostbolt this time, it's going to automatically launch that next Icicle. And you see it kind of flung out there from the side. It's really small, so it's kind of hard to see. There it goes. And then when we use Ice Lance, which let's go ahead and see if we can get that frozen damage on Ice Lance. This thing is not wanting to cooperate with me. Alright, there we go. So we cast Flurry, then our Ice Lance will shoot off all those Icicles. Okay. So you may ask, like, okay, well, the Icicle or the Ice Lance does triple damage against frozen targets, but nothing else is doing anything special. Well, that brings us to our final passive, Shatter. Shatter multiplies the critical strike chance of your spells against frozen targets by 1.5 and adds an additional 50% critical strike chance. So when your target is frozen or your spells think that your target is frozen because of brain freeze, then you have a greatly increased critical strike chance against those targets. And that's why it's important to note the distinction between brain freeze and Fingers of Frost. Fingers of Frost only affects your Ice Lance. Brain freeze affects everything. Alright. Now, our second paragraph on our Blizzard here. Each time Blizzard deals damage, the cooldown on your Frozen Orb will get reduced by half a second. So when you start to incorporate Frozen Orb into your rotation, then that will come up and that will be important. So, how does the rotation work? So you're going to open up with your Frostbolt because you're trying to get Brain Freeze and Fingers of Frost. You just keep spamming this until you get something. Okay, now we've got Flurry. So we'll cast Flurry and then we'll cast Ice Lance right away because we know we're going to get that triple damage. Alright, we go back into Frostbolt, Flurry, Ice Lance, Frostbolt. So pretty much you always want to cast your Flurry when you get the proc, and then cast your Ice Lance right away right after that. Now, if you get both of them at the same time, you still want to cast Flurry first, because you'll get that extra Icicle, then cast Ice Lance. So that's the general rotation. Frostbolt, Flurry when it procs, Ice Lance right after that, right back into Frostbolt. Now, if you are fighting multiple targets, you obviously want to take advantage of your Blizzard and use that to deal some AoE damage. And that is the general rotation for the Frost Mage. So now we want to get into our talent tree and create a build that's going to work well in open world content. So we're going to set that up here. Alright, so this is the build that I recommend for outdoor content. It's not the only one that you can use, but it is the one that I recommend, and will be showing off at the end of this video. So we're going to go through each of the talents, and we're going to talk about what the talent does and why we've chosen it for the build. So first off, we have Ice Nova. Ice Nova gives us a new ability with a 25-second cooldown, so we can put that onto our bar. And I'm leaving a gap for a reason, don't worry. Ice Nova causes a whirlwind of icy wind around the enemy, dealing a large amount of frost damage to the target and an okay amount of frost damage to all other enemies within 8 yards, and it freezes them in place. So you not only get to deal a nice chunk of damage to a target, but you get to freeze all the enemies around, which helps you both defensively because they can't come and attack you, but also offensively because your spells will then deal that increased chance to critical strike because of Shatter, or you'll get that triple damage on Ice Lance because that target is frozen. So when you do decide to use your Ice Nova, a good thing to do is hit Ice Nova and then immediately cast Ice Lance for the triple damage, then go into your normal rotation. Alright, because our Ice Lance is instant and has no cooldown, so every time we get the chance to get that triple damage from it, we want to cast it. Now next we have Shimmer, and I'm going to switch this off for just a second. So our regular Blink will teleport us forward 20 yards. When we choose Shimmer, this basically adds an extra charge to our Blink. So now we have 2 charges, and it gives us a little more flexibility, some more mobility. We can travel faster. We also have the ability to get away from enemies more often. So it's a nice utility ability we can use. Next we have Incanter's Flow. Magical energy flows through you while in combat, building up to 20% increased damage, then diminishing down to 4% increased damage, cycling every 10 seconds. Okay, so what that means is with this talent, when you're in combat, you get a minimum of 4% increased damage. And if we get into combat here, you're going to see this pop up, and it's going to increase up to 20%, then it's going to go back down to 4%, and then it will start to go back up again. So you always have a minimum of 4% increased damage. but you can get up to 20%. As you get really good at your rotation, you can start to look at how many stacks you have of Incanter's Flow and try to use your big abilities when you do have that 20% increased damage, but that's kind of a very micromanaging mini game that you can play if you want, but if you want to ignore it, you can. Next we have Frozen Touch. Frostbolt will grant you Fingers of Frost and Brain Freeze 20% more often. So you could see just there when I was spamming my Frostbolt, it was a lot easier for me to get both Fingers of Frost and Brain Freeze because of this talent. So there we got our Fingers of Frost. We got another one. So this just helps us to get these abilities more often. And that's going to help increase our damage output. Next we have Ice Ward. This gives Frost Nova 2 charges. Frost Nova is a great ability you can use to control your enemies and ensure that you're able to get away from them and keep them at bay, but also it freezes the target, which once again rolls into Shatter and our triple damage on Ice Lance. So very nice. Then we have Splitting Ice. Your Ice Lance and Icicles now deal 5% increased damage and hit a second nearby target for 80% of their damage. This also causes our Glacial Spike, which is a ability we have here, to hit a second nearby target for 80% of its damage. So let's show this off normally. We're going to get rid of this. So we've got our 3 Icicles here. Let's go ahead. We're going to build up to 5 Icicles. And when we use our Ice Lance now, it's going to hit both these targets, and so are our Icicles. See how they're going to both targets? Alright, so that lets us deal damage to 2 targets at the same time, which is very nice, because we don't have a whole lot of multi-target abilities other than Blizzard and our Frozen Orb. But this also ties into our last talent pick, which goes right there. This is Glacial Spike, so this changes things for us kind of entirely. This conjures a massive spike of ice. It merges your current icicles into that spike of ice, and then it will impale your target, dealing a ton of damage. So it deals a ton on its own. Then it also will add all the damage from all your icicles for even more damage, and then it will freeze the target in place for 4 seconds, meaning your Shatter, your triple Ice Lance damage, like all that stuff will deal that increased, get the benefits of your target being frozen. Now, in order to cast this ability, you have to have 5 Icicles, so you have to build up to 5 now. But here's the catch. When you cast Ice Lance, you no longer launch your Icicles. So before, when we were playing, if we switch this back out, let's do our regular rotation and see why this is important, okay? So if we do our Frostbolts, and just pay attention to our Icicles. We do our Flurry, and then we immediately want to cast Ice Lance. Well, there go all of our Icicles. We do Frostbolts, we do Flurry, we do Ice Lance. All of our Icicles are gone, right? So, obviously, if we were trying to build up to 5 Icicles to cast Glacial Spike, that would be hard to do. It would be really disruptive to our rotation. However, because now our Ice Lance will no longer launch Icicles, we can do our exact rotation. Frostbolt, we're going to do Flurry into Ice Lance, and our Icicles don't go anywhere. So then we go Frostbolt, we're going to go Frostbolt again, into Flurry, into Ice Lance, into Glacial Spike. Everything combines into a giant spike that does a ton of damage. A ton. And because we have Splitting Ice, that giant shard of ice that does a ton of damage will also hit a second nearby target for 80% of that damage. So this turns our icicles into just this massive damaging ability without really affecting our rotation too much. So the main thing now is that we're going to follow our regular rotation the way we normally would. We'll Frostbolt, keep building up our Frostbolts. If we get our proc on Flurry, we'll use it. We didn't. So once we've built up to 5 icicles, boom, Glacial Spike. Then we go right back into our regular rotation. Frostbolts. We got our Ice Lance because we got our proc for Fingers of Frost there. Frostbolt. We're building up to 5 again. And Glacial Spike again. Alright. And then we have the added bonus of being able to cast our Ice Nova to deal some increased damage as well. Freeze the targets as we need to if we want to get a nice triple damage Ice Lance in as well. And that's it. That's the rotation. That's the build. So the next thing is to take a look at the PvP talents you could take if you wanted to toggle on War Mode and mainly focus on PvE. First off, I recommend you take Relentless. This will replace your Honorable Medallion, turn it into a passive ability that will reduce the duration of incoming crowd control effects by 20%. It's a nice set it and forget it talent. Then we have Chilled to the Bone. Your Frost Nova and your Water Elementals freeze deal a nice chunk of damage when the effect ends. The damage will be doubled if Frost Nova or Freeze are dispelled. This is usually not the case on computer-controlled opponents, so that won't really apply. But you're going to use Frost Nova quite a lot to keep the enemy away from you. And having it also deal a nice chunk of damage when it expires is really, really nice because it just increases your DPS while also folding that into a nice damaging ability. Then we have Frostbite. This will give your chill effects a 15% chance to freeze the target for 5 seconds, or 4 seconds. So most of our abilities have a chance to chill the target, which means that, you know, we're just going to be randomly freezing things for 4 seconds all the time. That's going to help with our survivability. That's going to help with our shatter bonus, and that's going to help with getting our Ice Lance to do that triple damage. And then finally, Temporal Shield. This is an ability on a 45-second cooldown. It envelops you in a shield for 6 seconds, and at the end of that time, 100% of all the damage that you've taken will be restored. So this effectively works as a delayed massive heal. So if you're at 100%, you jump into a bunch of enemies, you take 75% of your health and damage while you have the shield on, you will heal for 75% of your maximum health when the shield ends. So very nice defensive tool. Now, one other thing to add in here is that as a Frost Mage, and with the build we have, you get the bonus of being able to summon a Water Elemental. So you should have your Water Elemental out at all times. He's going to help you fight. He might tank for you a little bit, but mainly he's going to be casting 2 abilities. He casts Water Bolt, which deals some frost damage to the target. And he will cast Freeze, which will blast targets in an 8-yard radius with frost, freezing them in place for up to 8 seconds. Damage can interrupt the effect, so you'll get some extra freezes from your Water Elemental. And yeah, so it's nice to have a little extra pet with you. Alright, so the next thing to do is take this build out into the open world, show it off against some different types of enemies. So I'm going to cut to that, and I'll see you there. Alright, so we're here in Suramar City, and we're going to fly down and try out this build against some different types of enemies. So we're going to open up with our Frostbolt. We got our Flurry, so we're going to cast that and go... Normally we would go right into our Ice Lance after that. Now note that for our ability here, our Brain Freeze, that applies to... not Brain Freeze, I'm sorry. The Winter's Chill gets applied to the target, and once the target dies, that's no longer applied. Alright, so there we go. And we're building up our icicles. So let's go ahead and Let's try to get all these guys right here, because what I want to do is I want to show off how if we cast our Frostbolt, we get our 5, and we can Glacial Spike for a huge chunk of damage. There we go. We can cast our Ice Nova. We got our Water Elemental tanking for us a little bit there. Now, I took an unnecessary amount of damage there just because I kind of wanted to show off how the Glacial Spike would hit multiple targets, and it did. It took a big chunk off of those targets, but you got to remember, it only hits 2. So I pulled 3 there, so one of them didn't take a big chunk of damage because we don't hit 3 targets with that. So you want to manage the number of enemies that you're fighting. Alright, Frostbolt. We got our Fingers of Frost. There we go. When you're on a mage, you don't really have a lot of ways, or any ways, really, to heal yourself. So you're going to want to make sure you've got your refreshment conjured. And that goes into your bag. You can stick that on your bar, and whenever you need to, you could sit down, and this is going to give you back 100% of your health and mana over 20 seconds. Usually you don't need 100%. If you did, you'd be dead. So you can usually get healed up pretty quick. Alright, so we didn't get any benefits or any procs from that, so it's going a little bit slow. Now we can switch to this target and use our Glacial Spike. Boom, there we go. Took out both of them. Okay, so what do we do in a situation where we do have multiple targets? Well, we're going to want to make sure we're using our Blizzard. We're going to want to use our Ice Nova, and we can throw out our Frost Orb if we want to. So let's see. I always get ambushed by these elites over here. There they are. So let's go take on these guys. So we are going to open up with our Frostbolt. Throw down our Ice Nova. We're going to cast our Ice Lance. We're going to go ahead and Blizzard. Alright, so we're going to Blizzard. We're going to go ahead and Shimmer through our Blizzard so they'll come through and take damage. Cast our Frozen Orb. We got our Ice Lance. We're trying to build up our Icicles here. We want to make sure we have that Ice Barrier that I said we should have up all the time. And there we go. Now, we could have easily done this without using the Frozen Orb cooldown. But I did want to show it off. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to collect another group of enemies here. But I advise you, always pay attention to your health on a mage. Use your refreshment. Get yourself up to 100% before you start a big fight. You can always, I've got 17, I can always conjure some more. And now I'm up to 37. It's infinite food, so use it. Alright, so let's get on our Monterey, on our mount here. We're going to go and collect some enemies. We're going to collect all these guys. So we're going to go into a Frost Nova. Stall those guys out. We're going to hit them with our Ice Nova. Okay, they're out of range here. We'll use our Frozen Orb. Alright, we got some Fingers of Frost, so let's use those. Use our Blizzard. Now, we always want to try to make sure that our enemies are running through our Blizzard, so it's a good idea to blink through that, or shimmer through that, and then that way they're chasing you through the Blizzard. Use our Fingers of Frost. Alright, this guy's just about dead. Alright, we'll Frostbolt. We can Frost Nova here and keep him at bay. Go ahead and cast our Ice Nova on him. And you can see on Frost, it's very easy to control your opponent because so many of your effects are going to freeze and slow the target. So we did use our Frozen Orb there. It probably wasn't necessary, but the majority of that fight we did with just our normal, regular old cooldowns. And it was perfectly manageable. So, as is tradition, I'm going to go up and take on this elite up here, but we'll go over here and use our food real quick. Get ourselves back up to 100%. Or close to it. Alright, so we'll come down over here. We can cast our Ice Nova to take out these guys pretty quickly. Throw down a Blizzard if we want to. Alright. Use our Frozen Orb if we are just tired of dealing with them. Alright, we're going to launch right into fighting this enemy here since we have all these perks. There we go. Go back into our Frost Nova. We're going to hit our Ice Nova. Try to build up to our maximum icicles and use our Glacial Spike. There we go. And dead. Alright, so that's it. I hope this has helped you to understand how to play the Frost Mage a little bit better. Hope it's given you the confidence to get on your own Frost Mage, get out there in the open world, start questing and leveling, farming, and see if this is a specialization that you'd enjoy. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, whatever you want to do to help encourage me to keep making this type of content. I hope you have a great time in Battle for Azeroth, and thank you for watching.